Michael Jordan reunites with Janitor, who watched every one of his games. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The air in the old stadium was thick with memories. The lights were dim, and the echoes of the past still seemed to hum in the empty hallways. Michael Jordan hadn't been back here in years. It had been decades since he'd played his last game at the Chicago Stadium, but the memories were as vivid as ever. The energy of those games, the roar of the crowd, the spotlight that had followed him everywhere, it all felt like it had happened just yesterday. But today, he wasn't here for the fans or the game. Today, he was here for something entirely different. Michael was about to meet someone who had been a constant presence in his life during his playing days, even though he had never truly noticed him. A man who had been there every step of the way, watching from the shadows, supporting him from the sidelines. Raymond, the janitor. The first time Michael had ever met Raymond was in the back hallways of the Chicago Stadium during his rookie year. Michael was a rising star, full of energy and ambition, and the stadium was where he would come to hone his craft. He was focused on basketball, obsessed with it, consumed by it. In the midst of the fast-paced life he was building, he had never really paid attention to the workers who moved in and out of the shadows. Raymond was one of those workers, quietly doing his job, ensuring the stadium stayed in pristine condition. He would sweep the floors, clean the bathrooms, and tend to the places where the fans never went. But Raymond wasn't just any janitor. He had a secret. While everyone else was focused on the stars of the game, Raymond watched every single one of Michael's games. He was there in the stands, or sometimes behind the scenes, always present. He saw Michael's rise, his struggles, his triumphs, and his falls. He saw it all, not as a fan, but as someone who quietly observed, who appreciated what Michael was doing but never sought recognition for his support. For Raymond, it wasn't about fame or attention, it was about his silent respect for the player who was doing something extraordinary. As time went on, Michael's fame grew, and so did the distance between him and everyone else. He became a superstar, a legend. The people who had once been close to him, the trainers, the staff, the support crew, were now just faces in the crowd. Michael was always surrounded by people, but few of them truly knew him. His world became increasingly insular, focused on his success, his achievements, and the relentless drive to be the best. The people who worked around him, who had seen him every day, became part of the background noise that faded as the spotlight grew brighter. But Raymond was different. Raymond never asked for anything. He simply watched, quietly rooting for Michael from afar. It wasn't until years later, when Michael was deep into his retirement, that the idea of reaching out to Raymond crossed his mind. He had spent years consumed by his legacy, by his place in basketball history. But now, as he looked back on everything, he realized that some of the most important moments in his career weren't the ones that made the headlines. They were the quiet moments, the ones spent with the people who had been there through it all, even if their names weren't known to the public. Michael had been through a lot in his life, losses, victories, retirements, comebacks, and everything in between. But one thing had remained constant throughout it all, his love for the game. It was that love that had driven him to become the best, and it was that love that had connected him with countless fans, teammates, and even strangers like Raymond. As Michael thought about his journey, he realized how much those small, unseen connections had shaped him. Raymond wasn't just a janitor. He was a witness to Michael's story, someone who had been there, not for the accolades, but for the love of the game. The decision to reach out wasn't an easy one. Michael had never been the sentimental type, and the idea of reconnecting with someone from his past felt both comforting and intimidating. But there was something about Raymond, something about the way he had quietly supported Michael through all the ups and downs of his career, that made Michael want to do more than just remember him from a distance. He wanted to thank him, to express his gratitude for the silent support that had meant more than words could say. The idea of going back to the old stadium brought a wave of nostalgia over Michael. It had been a long time since he had set foot in this place, since the roar of the crowd had been directed at him. Back then, it had felt like he was invincible, unstoppable. Now, as he stood in the shadows of the old arena, he was a different man. The invincibility had faded, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. The titles, the trophies, the fame, they no longer defined him. It was the relationships, the people who had been there, supporting him through it all, that mattered most. As Michael walked through the familiar halls, the scent of the old wood floors and the echo of past games filled the space. The arena had changed since he last played here, newer buildings had risen, the fans had moved on to newer stars, and the game had evolved in ways that were unimaginable back in his prime. But the memories remained. The moments, the games, the titles, they were all part of his history. And now, he was about to meet someone who had been part of that history in his own way. A person who had witnessed everything, even when Michael hadn't noticed. Walking through the hallway that led to the court, Michael's steps slowed. He could almost hear the cheers of the crowd in his mind, feel the adrenaline of the games, the pressure of the moment. And then he stopped. There, at the end of the hall, was a door that led to the same tunnel he had walked through countless times. A tunnel that, for him, had always represented the beginning of something bigger, the place where he transformed into a champion. Today, that same tunnel felt different. It felt like a doorway to the past, to a moment that had long been overlooked. Raymond was waiting there. His face was older now, lined with the years of hard work, but the same quiet dignity was there. He hadn't changed much. Michael approached him slowly, the weight of the moment pressing on him. "Raymond," Michael said, his voice filled with emotion. "It's good to see you." Raymond smiled, his eyes shining with a mixture of recognition and humility. "Good to see you, too, Michael." There was no grand speech, no fanfare. Just two men who had shared a history, one in the spotlight, the other in the shadows. Michael extended his hand, and Raymond took it, both of them silently acknowledging the significance of this moment. It wasn't about thank yous or speeches. It was about a recognition that had been years in the making, the quiet gratitude that had always been there, waiting for the right moment. And in that moment, standing together in the empty arena, Michael Jordan realized that this was the real victory. The true legacy was not in the records or the rings, but in the people who had stood by him, the ones who had been there when no one else was watching. Michael Jordan sat in the back seat of the car, looking out the window as Chicago passed by. The streets seemed familiar, but they were also distant now. The city had changed in many ways since the days when he was the focal point of everything, its basketball hero, its icon. Now, as he made his way to the old stadium, a wave of nostalgia washed over him. It wasn't just about the game, it was about what that game had represented. The raw emotion, the high stakes, the fire to win. Yet, the fire had dimmed, and Michael was learning to embrace that shift. The day had started with a simple phone call, an invitation to meet Raymond. The janitor who had quietly watched his every game, his every step, from the shadows. For all the years of fame and recognition, there had been someone who had witnessed it all from a distance, someone who had never asked for anything in return. Raymond had been a part of his story, even if Michael had never truly realized it. That realization, in itself, felt important. The idea of returning to the old stadium, the place where it all began, stirred something in Michael. He hadn't set foot in this building since his retirement, since the last championship season. That was a lifetime ago in his mind. But now, as the car slowly approached the stadium, something pulled at him. It wasn't the desire to relive his glory days or to bask in nostalgia. It was the recognition that his journey had been shared by so many, and that he had forgotten some of those people, even the ones who had quietly supported him. The car stopped in front of the old building. The lights were dim, and the arena felt quiet now, a far cry from the roaring crowd that used to pack the seats. Michael stepped out of the car, his footsteps heavy as he made his way toward the entrance. The memories seemed to flood back with each step. The sound of sneakers squeaking on the court, the buzz of anticipation in the air, the way the crowd erupted when he made one of those impossible shots. But none of that mattered now. Not in the way it had when he was chasing greatness. He walked into the building, his footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The stadium seemed even quieter now. He made his way through the hallways, the ones where he had spent so much time, getting ready for games, cooling down after them, passing by teammates and coaches. The memories hit him in waves, but it was a strange mix of warmth and distance. He had been so focused on his own journey, on being the best, that he had forgotten about the people who had been there with him along the way. The hallway led to a set of stairs, and as he climbed them, Michael's thoughts shifted to Raymond. He hadn't seen him in years. He had probably never really seen him, not in the way that Raymond had always seen him. What was it that had kept Raymond coming to every game? Was it his job, or was it something more, something personal? Michael didn't know, but he was about to find out. At the top of the stairs, he walked through another set of doors, and there, standing by the court, was Raymond. He was older now, his face marked by the years of work and life, but the same quiet presence was there. His hands were calloused, his clothes worn, but his eyes still carried that same admiration. When their eyes met, Michael felt an odd mixture of gratitude and guilt. Gratitude for the silent support Raymond had given him all these years, and guilt for never acknowledging it sooner. "Raymond," Michael said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Raymond's face softened, a smile breaking through. "Michael," he said, his voice low but filled with warmth. "I didn't expect to see you here." Michael walked closer, taking in the sight of the man who had watched him grow from a young, hungry player to the greatest of all time. "I wanted to see you," Michael said. "I wanted to thank you." Raymond's smile deepened, but he quickly shrugged, as if the idea of gratitude was unnecessary. "I've always been here, Michael. Just doing my job." Michael nodded slowly, taking in Raymond's words. "It's more than that. You were always here, watching, supporting. I didn't know it at the time, but I know now." Raymond looked down for a moment, almost as if he were embarrassed by the attention. "I never needed thanks. I just wanted to watch you play. It was something special, what you did. What you brought to this game." Michael smiled, appreciating the simplicity of Raymond's words. They weren't loaded with grandeur or awe, just honesty. For a man who had never been in the spotlight, Raymond had a way of cutting through the noise. Michael had spent so many years surrounded by people who were quick to tell him how great he was. But Raymond's quiet admiration felt different. It felt real. The two men stood there for a moment, side by side, looking out at the empty court. The echoes of past games seemed to reverberate in the space, but it was the silence between them that felt most significant. It wasn't just a reunion between two people, it was a moment of recognition for both of them. Michael, who had spent so much of his life focused on the spotlight, and Raymond, who had quietly observed it all, each had their own path, their own journey. But here they were, standing together, sharing a bond that had lasted for years, even if they hadn't fully realized it until now. "You watched every game, didn't you?" Michael asked, breaking the silence. Raymond nodded. "Every one. Even the bad ones. I didn't miss a thing." Michael laughed softly, the sound almost foreign to him. "I bet there were plenty of bad ones." "There were," Raymond said with a chuckle. "But it didn't matter. You always came back. You always pushed harder." Michael nodded. "I guess that's the key, huh? Never giving up." "It's more than that," Raymond replied. "It's about knowing what's worth fighting for. You always knew what that was. For you, it was basketball. For me, it was just being there. I didn't need the spotlight. I just needed to see someone give their all, day in and day out." The simplicity of Raymond's words struck Michael harder than he had expected. It wasn't the accolades or the fame that made him who he was. It was the dedication, the commitment to something greater than himself. It was something Raymond had understood long before Michael had fully grasped it. The quiet support, the dedication, the passion, it was all part of what made the game beautiful. And it wasn't just the players who contributed to that. It was the people who stood by them, even in the background, who made it all possible. Michael looked at Raymond, feeling a deep sense of appreciation. "Thank you," he said simply, knowing that words couldn't fully express the gratitude he felt in this moment. Raymond just smiled, his eyes full of understanding. "You don't need to thank me, Michael. You've done enough. Just keep doing what you're doing." That's all that matters. And in that moment, Michael understood. The legacy wasn't just about the games he had played or the victories he had won. It was about the people he had touched along the way, the ones who had seen him for who he truly was, not just as a basketball player, but as a person. And for Raymond, the quiet janitor who had supported him from the shadows, that recognition was all he had ever needed. As the two men stood there, side by side, looking out at the court, Michael felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The game was no longer the center of his world. It had been a part of his life, but it was the people, like Raymond, who had shaped him in ways he had never fully appreciated until now. The legacy of Michael Jordan wasn't just about what he had accomplished on the court. It was about the quiet moments, the relationships, and the recognition that greatness wasn't defined by trophies and titles. It was defined by the people who shared the journey with you. And for that, Michael Jordan would forever be grateful. The next morning, Michael woke up to the soft hum of his phone vibrating on the nightstand. It was still early, the kind of morning when the world felt like it was just starting to wake up, and he hadn't yet begun to think about the day ahead. He had spent the previous evening reflecting on his life, his career, and the significance of his reunion with Raymond. For all the years of fame, the glory, the rings, and the headlines, it was this quiet moment of connection that had left the deepest impact on him. As he scrolled through his messages, one from his son, Marcus, stood out. It simply read, "I saw you with Raymond last night." That was special. Michael smiled softly. Marcus had always been observant, always picking up on the little things. His son understood, even at a young age, the importance of connections, of gratitude, and of acknowledging the people who made a difference. After a quick breakfast, Michael spent some time reflecting. He hadn't expected this reunion to stir up so much. He had thought it would be a simple meet-up, a quiet acknowledgement of someone who had been a part of his journey without him even knowing it. But as he thought back to Raymond's quiet support, Michael realized how much he had missed during the years when his world had been consumed by basketball. The games, the victories, the spotlight, those had all been important, but they were not what mattered in the end. What mattered were the people who had quietly rooted for him, those who had been part of his journey, even from the shadows. Later that afternoon, Michael found himself back at the old stadium. The air felt heavy with memories, and though the place was quieter now, it still had that distinct energy. The building had changed, just like everything else. The new arena, the upgrades, and the modern amenities were a far cry from the days when it had been the center of the basketball universe. But the memories, those would always remain. The echoes of fans cheering, the thrill of the game, it all lived on in Michael's mind. Raymond wasn't at the stadium today, but Michael felt a pull to come back. Maybe it was the familiarity of the place, or maybe it was just the sense of peace he had found. He had spent so many years running from the weight of his success, from the pressures of being the greatest. But now, standing here, it all seemed so distant. The rings, the trophies, they didn't define him anymore. The people, the relationships, the simple moments of gratitude, those were the things that truly mattered. As he walked through the hallways of the arena, Michael paused at a familiar spot, the hallway leading to the locker rooms. The place where he had spent countless hours preparing for games, where the tension and excitement of the game had built up before every tip-off. He could almost hear the noise of the crowd in his mind, the intensity of the moment as the team gathered together for one last huddle before hitting the floor. It was in moments like this, when he was walking through these familiar spaces, that Michael truly understood the significance of what he had achieved. It wasn't the championships or the MVPs that made his career memorable. It was the people who had been part of it. The coaches, the teammates, the staff, and the fans, they all had a hand in his success. And Raymond, who had silently watched every one of his games, was a reminder that greatness was often built not by those in the spotlight, but by those who quietly supported from the shadows. Michael sat down on one of the benches near the locker room, his mind wandering back to those days. The days when he had been a kid, unsure of what his future would hold. The days when the world had seemed so much bigger than him, and he had no idea how he would ever fit into it. But then, he had found his purpose in basketball. He had found his way. And now, all these years later, he understood that the journey had been more important than the destination. He was still Michael Jordan, the man who had revolutionized the game, the player who had won 6 NBA championships and countless accolades. But now, he was something more. He was a man who understood that success wasn't just about winning, it was about how you lived your life, the people you touched, and the legacy you left behind. As he sat there, his thoughts shifted to his family. His children, who had grown up with the shadow of his legacy looming over them, had their own lives now. They were carving their own paths, living their own stories. Michael had always been there for them, but he knew that he hadn't always been present in the way he should have been. The demands of his career had often kept him away, and though he had tried to be there, he hadn't always understood what it meant to truly be involved in their lives. But now, as he reflected on his journey, he realized how important those quiet moments were, those moments when he wasn't chasing a championship or worrying about the next game. It was those moments, the ones spent with family, that truly defined his legacy. The phone rang, snapping Michael out of his thoughts. It was his wife, Juanita. He answered quickly, eager to hear her voice. "Hey," he said, his tone warm. "What's up?" "I was just thinking about you," she replied. "Are you still at the old stadium?" Michael chuckled. "Yeah, I'm here. Just reflecting, you know? It's strange, being back here. It feels like everything has changed, but also, nothing has. It's all still here, the memories, the history." "I know what you mean," Juanita said softly. "But you've changed, too. You're not the same person you were when you were playing. You've come so far, Michael. I've seen it. And I think you're starting to understand that the things that matter most aren't the ones that get celebrated." He paused, letting her words sink in. She was right. In the midst of everything, in the whirlwind of success and fame, he had lost sight of the things that truly mattered. It wasn't about being the best anymore. It was about being the best version of himself, for his family, for his children, and for the people who had always been there, like Raymond. "I think I'm starting to get it," Michael said quietly. "It's not about the spotlight. It's about the people. It's about the moments we share, the things we do for each other." Juanita was silent for a moment. "You're exactly right. It's about love, Michael. It's about connection. And you've made an impact in so many lives, not just through basketball, but through the person you are." The conversation continued, and as Michael listened to his wife's words, he felt a deeper sense of clarity. The life he had lived, the legacy he had built, wasn't about the victories or the recognition. It was about the quiet moments, the relationships, and the impact he had made on the people around him. He ended the call, feeling lighter than he had in years. The weight of his past had lifted in ways he hadn't expected. The drive to constantly prove himself, to always be the best, was no longer the center of his world. Instead, it was about finding peace, about living fully in the present, and about giving back to those who had supported him along the way. As he stood up, Michael looked around the stadium once more. It had been his home for so many years, and though he no longer played here, it would always be a part of him. But now, it wasn't just the arena or the fans that defined him. It was the people who had been there for him when the lights went down, the ones who had been his quiet support, his unseen allies. And as he walked away from the court for the last time, Michael knew that he was ready for the next chapter of his life, one that would be defined by love, connection, and gratitude. The next few weeks felt like a turning point in Michael Jordan's life. The encounter with Raymond had set off a series of reflections that Michael hadn't expected. He thought he had come to terms with everything, his legacy, his career, his family. But now, walking through the streets of Chicago, he realized there was more to the story. The idea of recognition, of understanding how his actions had impacted those around him, had been something he'd only scratched the surface of. For years, he had been so focused on what he had accomplished that he never really considered the quiet strength of the people who had supported him. Raymond was just one example of those unsung heroes, individuals who had been there when the cameras weren't rolling, when the crowds weren't cheering. And for all of the accolades he had earned, Michael now understood that he owed just as much to those who had quietly watched from the sidelines. Over the next few days, he spent more time with his family. They were the people who had truly been with him through thick and thin. His wife, Juanita, had always understood him in a way that no one else could, and his children, even though they were growing older, still provided him with a sense of purpose he had never found in his career. He began to make a more deliberate effort to be there, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. His role as a father, a husband, and a friend had been pushed aside during the years when he was so consumed with basketball, but now he realized that these were the relationships that mattered most. In a quiet moment one evening, sitting at the dinner table with his kids, Michael reflected on how much he had missed during those years. The successes, the trophies, the endorsements, they had all come with a price. He had been there for the games, but he hadn't been there for the everyday moments. The simple joys, the growth of his children, the small family traditions, he had let those things slip by, consumed by the pressures of his fame. Now, as he looked at his kids, he realized how much he had taken for granted. "Dad," his son, Jeffrey, said during dinner, "I saw a video of one of your old games the other day. You were really good back then. I mean, you were amazing." Michael smiled, appreciating the admiration. "Thanks, Jeffrey. But it wasn't just about being good. It was about wanting to be the best and putting everything into it." Jeffrey nodded, clearly understanding the weight of his father's words. "Yeah, but it wasn't just the game, right? It was the way you kept going, even when things were tough." "Exactly," Michael said, looking at his son with pride. "It wasn't about being perfect. It was about learning, growing, and getting back up after you fall. That's the most important lesson I could ever teach you." That conversation stuck with Michael. It reminded him that his journey wasn't just about the basketball court or the records, it was about resilience, and that resilience was something he had always tried to pass down to his kids. They had witnessed his highs and lows, and in doing so, they had learned some of the same lessons he had learned on the court. But more than that, they had learned about the value of family, of the quiet moments that made life meaningful. Later that week, Michael took a trip to visit his old high school. It had been years since he had walked those halls, and yet there was something about returning that felt like unfinished business. The gym was empty now, but Michael could still remember the way it had looked when he was there, full of energy, full of hope. It was in this gym that he had first experienced the sting of failure, when Coach Clifton had cut him from the varsity team. It was a moment that had haunted him for years, fueling the drive that had ultimately led him to the NBA. But now, standing there, he saw it in a different light. The rejection wasn't the thing that had made him great. It had been the way he had responded to it, the way he had turned pain into something positive. He walked around the gym, letting the memories wash over him. He thought about his teammates, the ones who had supported him through the ups and downs of high school basketball. They were the ones who had helped him build the foundation for his future. They were the ones who had cheered for him when no one else would. And just like Raymond, they had played a role in the man he had become. As Michael stood in the center of the gym, he felt a sense of closure. The ghost of the rejection that had once defined him no longer had the same power. He wasn't defined by that moment anymore. He was defined by how he had used that rejection as a stepping stone, how he had turned his failures into triumphs. The journey from high school to the NBA had been long and difficult, but it had shaped him into the person he was today. After a few quiet moments, Michael left the gym and walked outside, where his son Marcus was waiting for him. The two of them walked together to the car, the sun setting behind them. As they walked, Michael couldn't help but think about the impact he had made, not just in the game of basketball, but on the people around him. It wasn't about the rings or the MVPs, it was about the relationships, the lessons, and the people who had been there for him through it all. "Marcus," Michael said, "basketball has given me a lot. But the real victories are the ones that happen off the court. The ones you don't see in the headlines." Marcus looked up at him. "Like family?" "Exactly," Michael replied, his voice full of conviction. "The people who are there for you when the spotlight isn't on you, that's what matters most." As they got into the car and drove away, Michael felt a sense of contentment. He had spent so much of his life chasing the next challenge, the next goal, the next big win. But now, as he looked back on his journey, he realized that it was the quiet moments, the ones spent with family, the ones spent with friends like Raymond, that had given him the most fulfillment. The true measure of success wasn't how many championships you won. It was about the people you had around you, the ones who had shared in your journey and helped you become who you were meant to be. Over the next few days, Michael continued to reflect on his journey. He spent time with his teammates from the Bulls, reconnecting with them and hearing their stories about the old days. They shared laughs, they reminisced about the good times, and they reflected on the challenges they had faced together. It wasn't just about basketball, it was about the bond they had built through years of shared experience. And as he listened to their stories, Michael realized how much they had all given to each other, how much they had shaped each other's lives. The more he thought about it, the more Michael understood that his legacy wasn't just about the things he had done on the court. It was about the people he had touched along the way, the teammates who had helped him get there, the coaches who had believed in him, and the fans who had cheered him on. It was about the quiet support that had come from people like Raymond, who had watched every game, who had been there when the lights went down, and who had never asked for anything in return. It was this realization that gave Michael peace. He had achieved everything he had set out to do, and now, as he looked forward, he understood that it wasn't about what he still had to accomplish. It was about what he had already done. The people he had influenced, the lives he had touched, those were the things that mattered most. And in that knowledge, Michael Jordan found a deeper sense of purpose than he had ever found in the pursuit of basketball greatness. In the days that followed his reflection at the stadium, Michael Jordan began to feel a sense of clarity that he hadn't experienced in years. The meeting with Raymond, the quiet janitor who had silently supported him, had sparked something deep within him, a recognition of how much his journey had been shared by others. The idea of legacy had always been central to Michael's career, but it had mostly been defined by championships, accolades, and the spotlight. Now, he understood that the real legacy was built on the relationships he had fostered, the people who had quietly supported him through his struggles, and the moments of growth that had occurred outside of the public eye. He spent the next few weeks reconnecting with people from his past, former teammates, coaches, and even old friends from his early years in basketball. These were the people who had known him before the fame, before the championships, and before the global recognition. They reminded him of who he had been, the young player who had been full of ambition but also filled with doubt. They shared stories of how he had grown, how his drive had pushed them all to be better. These conversations, full of honesty and respect, felt different from the usual interviews or public appearances. They were rooted in a history that wasn't about the spotlight. They were about the shared experiences, the struggles, and the victories that had made his journey meaningful. During one of these reunions, Michael sat down with Scottie Pippen, his longtime teammate and friend. They hadn't spoken much since their playing days, and their relationship had always been complicated, both professionally and personally. Scottie had been his right-hand man through some of the most intense years of Michael's career, but their bond had been tested by the pressures of the game. Yet, in that moment, as they sat in a quiet cafe in Chicago, it felt as if none of that history mattered. It was just two friends, reminiscing about their shared experiences, reflecting on the impact they had made together. "You ever think about those years, Mike?" Scottie asked, his voice thoughtful. "Everything we went through, everything we built? It feels like it happened in another lifetime." Michael paused, letting the question linger. The years of tension, the rivalry with other teams, the constant grind, it had all seemed so important at the time. But now, looking back, Michael realized that the real significance wasn't in the victories themselves. It was in the people who had been by his side, the ones who had helped him navigate those challenges. "I think about it all the time," Michael said, his tone more reflective than usual. "But now, I see it differently. I see what we built, what we accomplished, but I also see the moments I missed. The times I should have been there more, the times I should have appreciated things more. Winning was always the goal, but now, I see that it was the journey, the people, the experiences that mattered most." Scottie nodded, his eyes softening as he understood the depth of Michael's words. "Yeah. I get that. We were all so focused on being the best, on winning, on proving ourselves. But we had something special. I don't think we realized just how special it was until we were on the other side of it. The conversation continued, and as they talked, Michael found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in years. He had spent so much of his career holding things inside, using his fierce competitive drive to shield himself from vulnerability. But now, he felt the weight of that wall lifting. He wasn't the invincible superstar anymore. He was a man who had seen the highs and lows of life, and he was learning how to embrace it all. Later that evening, Michael returned home, feeling the weight of the conversation with Scotty settle deep within him. As he entered the house, he found his family gathered in the living room, laughing and talking about their day. It was a simple moment, but it felt like everything. His children were growing older, and his relationship with them had changed over the years. They had always admired him for his accomplishments, but now, Michael felt like he was finally able to give them something more: his time, his attention, his presence. He sat down with his son, Jeffrey, and talked about basketball, life, and the importance of finding balance. "You know, Dad," Jeffrey said after a while, "I've been thinking about what you said about how you spent so much time trying to win, and now, you see that it was the journey that mattered. I think that's true. I see it with my own goals. I've always thought about what I want to accomplish, but I've realized that it's the people around me that make all the difference. It's not about what I win, it's about who I'm with along the way." Michael smiled, feeling a sense of pride in his son's maturity. Exactly. It's about finding purpose in everything you do. Whether it's basketball or something else, the journey is what shapes you. And the people who are with you, that's what makes it all worth it. That night, as Michael lay in bed, he thought about the years that had shaped him. The victories, the losses, the mistakes, the comebacks, everything had led him to this point. He had spent so much time focused on what was next, on what he could achieve, that he had missed the simple joys. But now, with a clearer perspective, he realized that the true victory wasn't in the next championship or the next accolade. It was in the relationships he had built, the people he had touched, and the growth he had experienced along the way. In the weeks that followed, Michael made a more conscious effort to reconnect with people from his past. He reached out to old friends, to teammates, to coaches. He spent time with his family, focusing on the things that truly mattered. He found joy in the small moments, the quiet dinners, the laughter shared with his children, the conversations with his wife. These were the things he had neglected during his career, and now, they were the things that gave him peace. One afternoon, Michael visited his old high school, the place where it all began. The gym was quiet now, the bleachers empty, but as he stepped onto the court, he was filled with a sense of nostalgia. This was where he had first learned the game, where he had first experienced the joy and the pain of competition. The memories of his early years in basketball rushed back, those days when he had been just another kid, dreaming of something bigger. He stood in the center of the court, looking around, and he realized that the journey had started here. It had started with the dreams, the doubts, and the uncertainty. It had started with a boy who had been cut from the varsity team, who had faced rejection and failure, but who had refused to give up. It had started with a lesson that would define his career: resilience. Michael took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past and the peace that had come with it. He wasn't the same person who had walked through these doors years ago. He had grown, changed, and evolved. And now, he was ready to embrace the next chapter of his life, one that was no longer defined by basketball, but by the lessons he had learned and the people who had shared the journey with him. As he left the gym and walked through the hallways of the school, Michael felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the people who had supported him, for the lessons that had shaped him, and for the opportunity to now pass those lessons on to others. He had always wanted to be the best, but now, he understood that greatness wasn't just about achieving success. It was about how you lived, who you touched, and what you left behind. And as he stepped out into the sunlight, he knew that his journey was far from over. There were still lessons to learn, still moments to share. But for the first time, he was at peace with everything that had come before. His legacy wasn't just in the championships or the records, it was in the relationships he had built, the people he had helped, and the impact he had made on the world. And that was something he would carry with him for the rest of his life. Michael Jordan spent the next several weeks in a reflective state, often caught in moments of deep introspection. It was as though the more he reached out to others, the more he realized how much he had left behind in the pursuit of being the best. There were friendships, family bonds, and the quiet, unnoticed contributions of people like Raymond, who had supported him all along. It wasn't just the moments in the spotlight that mattered, those were temporary. What had lasted, what had truly shaped him, were the smaller, less glamorous moments, the connections made without the world watching. One of his most significant realizations during this time was how much he had taken for granted. Basketball had always been his focus, his obsession. He had given everything to the game, but in doing so, he had missed out on the lives of those around him, his teammates, his coaches, and his family. He had always been driven by an overwhelming desire to win, to prove something to the world, but now, as he thought back on his journey, he could see how much he had sacrificed in the process. The recognition, the fame, had come, but they had never filled the deeper need for connection and understanding. A phone call from his former coach, Phil Jackson, was one of the catalysts for his growing understanding. Michael hadn't spoken to Phil in a while, and it wasn't a surprise that the conversation turned to life after basketball. Phil, ever the thoughtful mentor, seemed to understand where Michael was coming from. "You know, Michael," Phil said, "we all spend so much time chasing something, don't we? For you, it was greatness. But I think you're starting to see what matters beyond that." "I've been thinking about it a lot," Michael replied. "The things I sacrificed, the things I didn't realize I was missing. It's like I spent my whole life running after this idea of perfection, but I see now that what really matters are the moments I was too focused to see. The people, the relationships, those are the things that really define a legacy." Phil's voice softened. "It's never easy to come to that realization. But it's a powerful one when you do. I think that's where real growth comes from." The conversation stayed with Michael long after they hung up. Phil had always known how to push his buttons, to make him see things from a different perspective, but this was something deeper. It wasn't just about the game or the trophies, it was about who he had been along the way. It was about who he had become through the journey, and who he was still becoming. In the days that followed, Michael began to reach out more, seeking out those quiet voices from his past. People who had never asked for attention, but had always been there, just doing their part to make sure everything ran smoothly. People like his trainer, Tim Grover, who had worked with him through all the highs and lows of his career. Tim had always been the one pushing him to go further, to do more, but he was also the one who had seen the toll that the constant pursuit of greatness had taken on Michael. "Do you ever think about all the things you missed, Mike?" Tim asked one afternoon as they sat together, talking about their old training sessions. "The things that you just couldn't see because you were so focused on being the best?" Michael nodded. "I think about it a lot, actually. There were times when I thought I had to be perfect, that I had to do everything on my own, and in the process, I lost touch with so many things that really mattered. My relationships, my family, there were so many things I didn't give enough of myself to." Tim didn't respond immediately, but after a moment, he spoke with the calm wisdom that had always defined him. "We all get caught up in the idea of being perfect. But the truth is, no one is. And sometimes, the real victory isn't in the accolades or the titles, it's in understanding that the best thing you can do is show up, be real, and learn from every step you take. You did that, Mike. You taught the world that lesson, even if you didn't always realize it." As Michael sat there, listening to Tim's words, it hit him. This was what had been missing. All those years of winning, of pushing himself to be the best, had come at the cost of understanding that true greatness wasn't about never making mistakes. It was about learning from them, growing from them, and being willing to embrace the parts of yourself that weren't perfect. It was about showing up, even when it was hard, and being the person you needed to be, not just for the world, but for yourself. The more he thought about it, the more he understood that he had spent his entire career trying to prove something to others. But now, he realized that the most important thing was proving it to himself. It wasn't about winning for the sake of winning. It was about how he played the game, how he treated the people around him, and how he used his platform to make a positive impact. His career had always been about the fight, the competition, and the hunger to be the best. But it was the quiet moments, the ones where he simply showed up, that defined who he truly was. He thought back to Raymond, the janitor who had watched every game, who had been there not because of the fame or the recognition, but because he genuinely believed in what Michael was doing. Raymond's quiet support had meant more to Michael than he had ever known. And in this moment of reflection, Michael realized that it was people like Raymond who had kept him grounded, who had reminded him of the simple love for the game that had started it all. Raymond had never needed to be in the spotlight, and yet his loyalty, his belief in Michael's journey, had been unwavering. That was the kind of support that mattered, the kind that didn't come with any expectations, just genuine admiration. Michael decided to visit Raymond again, this time with a purpose beyond just the meeting. He wanted to thank him properly, to express his gratitude for all the years of silent support. He called Raymond the next morning, and the two of them arranged to meet at the same stadium. When Michael arrived, Raymond was already waiting by the courtside, just as he had been years ago. But this time, there was a new sense of awareness in Michael. The old stadium, the familiar court, the memories, they were all part of the story, but the most significant part of that story was standing right in front of him. "Raymond," Michael said as he walked up, offering a genuine smile. "I owe you more than you'll ever know." Raymond gave him a simple nod, his eyes full of understanding. "You don't owe me anything, Michael. You've done more than enough for the game. But I'm glad to see you figured out what really matters." Michael paused, letting those words sink in. He realized that Raymond had known all along. The game was never just about the basketball. It had always been about the people, the ones who supported you, the ones who helped you become who you were. It wasn't about the titles, the fame, or the accolades. It was about showing up, being present, and making the most of the time you had with the people who mattered. "You were there for me, Raymond," Michael said quietly. "And I wasn't always there for you, for the people who helped me get here. But I get it now. I get what it means to truly show up." Raymond smiled, a small, knowing smile. "You're here now, Michael. And that's what matters." In that moment, Michael understood. He had spent so many years chasing the idea of being the best, of achieving greatness for the sake of achieving greatness. But true greatness, he realized, wasn't about what you accomplished. It was about who you became in the process. It was about the people who helped you, the moments you shared, and the lessons you learned along the way. And in that simple, quiet exchange with Raymond, Michael Jordan finally felt at peace with his legacy. Michael Jordan's days had been filled with reflection and reconnection, but something still felt unfinished. He had spent years focused on being the best, pushing himself beyond limits others couldn't even imagine, but now that the noise had faded, he realized that the true measure of his success wasn't just in titles or accolades. The greatest victories were the moments shared, the lessons learned, and the connections made along the way. Still, despite his peace with the past, there was a lingering feeling that something more needed to be said or done. The day after his meeting with Raymond, Michael spent some time with his family. Juanita, his ex-wife, had been a constant presence in his life, and their relationship, though complicated by the pressures of his career, had always been rooted in respect and shared understanding. As they sat together with the kids, Michael realized just how much had changed in their dynamic. For years, their family had been shaped by his ambition. He had been distant at times, preoccupied with his desire to achieve more, and yet, they had always stuck by him. Now, with the lens of time, he could see the sacrifices they had made. Juanita had been the steady hand that guided their children while he was away, often sacrificing her own ambitions to support his career. Their kids had grown up in a world of privilege, but Michael understood that, despite the material wealth and the fame, it was their love and their bond that had provided stability. It was those relationships that had been tested and tried over the years, but like the great players he had competed with, they had endured, growing stronger in the process. As they sat around the table together, discussing the future, Michael listened more than he spoke. He had always been a man of action, a doer, but now he found value in silence and absorbing the world around him. He realized that, Just like his teammates had elevated him on the court, he now had the opportunity to elevate his family, to make up for the years he had taken them for granted. "Dad, do you think we'll ever be able to come back here, to the old stadium?" his daughter, Jasmine, asked, breaking his train of thought. She was the youngest, but already her curiosity and insight into the world around her were sharp. Michael paused. It was a question that stirred something inside him. The old stadium, the place where it had all started, had been a symbol of his journey, of everything he had achieved. But now, it represented something else, his roots, his past, and the people who had been there from the beginning. "I don't know," Michael said thoughtfully. "I think about it a lot, actually. That place isn't just a stadium, it's where I learned so many lessons. Not just about basketball, but about life. There's a lot of history there, and not just the kind that's celebrated in headlines. The real history is in the people who've been there with you." Jasmine nodded, clearly understanding the weight of her father's words. "It sounds like a lot more than just the game. It's about who was with you along the way." Michael smiled, feeling a wave of pride. Jasmine had always been perceptive, and in that moment, she understood the heart of what he was trying to express. "Exactly," he replied. "It's about the people, and what they bring to your journey. The real victory isn't in the titles you win. It's in the people who are with you, who help you get there." Later that afternoon, Michael went for a walk in the park. It was a simple thing, something he hadn't done in years. He had always been in a rush, caught up in the whirlwind of his career, always moving forward, always thinking about the next challenge. But now, as he walked under the shade of the trees, he found himself appreciating the moment. He took in the fresh air, the sounds of children playing in the distance, and the peaceful rhythm of his own thoughts. He realized that this was what had been missing from his life, the ability to simply be, without the need to constantly strive or prove anything. As he walked, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from his old teammate, Steve Kerr. "Want to grab a drink later? Let's catch up." Michael smiled. It had been years since he'd caught up with Steve. They had shared many moments on the court, from the highs of winning championships to the low moments of setbacks and defeats. Steve had always been a steady presence, a quiet leader in his own right. It wasn't just about basketball with him. Steve had always been the type to talk about life, family, and the importance of balance. Michael texted back, "Sounds good. Let's meet at that spot we used to go to." A few hours later, they sat across from each other at the small, local bar they used to frequent after games. The place hadn't changed much over the years, just the same dim lighting, the same old bartender, and the same familiar comfort. Steve was sitting back, sipping on a drink, as Michael joined him at the table. There was no grand speech, no formal introductions. Just two old friends reconnecting after years of distance. "You're looking good, Mike," Steve said with a grin. "It's been too long." Michael laughed, feeling a sense of ease he hadn't experienced in years. "Yeah, I've been keeping busy. But you know, it's different now. I've been thinking about the past a lot lately. Everything we did, everything we accomplished. It all feels like it happened in a different lifetime." Steve nodded, understanding exactly what Michael meant. "I get it. We were all so caught up in it. The games, the pressure, the competition. But now, when you look back, you realize that it wasn't just about that. It was about the moments that were really important, like the times we spent together, the conversations we had, the support we gave each other." Michael paused, the weight of Steve's words sinking in. "You're right. I used to think the only thing that mattered was winning. But now, I see it differently. It's about who was with you along the way. It's about the people who helped you through the tough times, who stood by you when the spotlight wasn't on you." Steve's eyes softened. "That's the real victory, Mike. Not the trophies or the fame. The people who had your back when no one else did. Those are the people who matter." The conversation drifted to old memories, games they had played, the rivalries they had faced, the triumphs and defeats they had shared. But it wasn't just basketball they talked about. They spoke of life, of family, and of the lessons they had learned along the way. Michael realized, in that moment, that it was these quiet conversations, these simple connections, that had truly shaped his life. The game had given him so much, but it was the people who had helped him along the way that had given him something even more valuable, a sense of purpose beyond the court. As they finished their drinks, Michael felt a deep sense of gratitude. He hadn't always understood the importance of these moments, the quiet, reflective moments with people who knew him before the fame and the recognition. But now, he understood. These were the moments that mattered. These were the moments that would define his legacy. Later that evening, as Michael lay in bed, he felt the weight of his life settle in a way it hadn't before. The pressure, the drive, the ambition, they were all part of the journey. But now, with everything he had learned, Michael felt content. He had done everything he set out to do in basketball. But it wasn't the championships that mattered anymore. It was the relationships he had built, the lessons he had learned, and the people who had stood by him. And in that, he had found peace. The next few days were filled with a quiet kind of energy that Michael had not experienced in years. Life after basketball had always felt like an open question, one that loomed over him no matter how many different ventures he pursued. But now, after reconnecting with those who had been part of his journey in ways he hadn't fully appreciated, something shifted within him. He felt grounded, connected to his past in a way that was deeper than memories of games or championships. This sense of peace, this quiet clarity, was something he had been chasing his whole life without even realizing it. He spent much of the time reflecting. Michael wasn't one for slowing down, but the series of conversations, especially with people like Raymond and Scotty, had made him see things from a new perspective. They had reminded him of the real importance of the relationships in his life. He'd always been the first one to push away, to separate himself from others in pursuit of greatness, but now he understood the value of connection, of human interaction beyond the sport. In the early days of his career, basketball had been a way to prove something, but the deeper joy came from the camaraderie, the shared experiences, and the unsung heroes who played just as important a role in his story. One of the first things he did was reach out to his old teammates. Though he had stayed in touch with many of them over the years, this was different. He wasn't just checking in, trying to relive old victories. He was trying to deepen the bond, to truly listen to the stories of their time together, to acknowledge how much they had all sacrificed, how much they had all given to each other. It wasn't easy for Michael. For so long, he had been the leader, the one who others turned to for answers. Now, he was learning to listen. He called Dennis Rodman first. Their relationship had always been complicated, full of highs and lows, but there had been a deep respect between them. Dennis was unpredictable, wild at times, but his commitment to the game was undeniable. He had made sacrifices too, and Michael knew that. When Michael picked up the phone, he was met with Dennis' usual offbeat humor. "What's up, MJ? You miss me already?" Dennis laughed, and Michael couldn't help but smile. There was something about Dennis' energy that always lightened the mood. "I do," Michael said. "I've been thinking about the old days. About everything we went through. It was tough, but we did it together. You and me, Scotty, everyone. You guys made me a better player, even if I never said it." Dennis paused, and for a moment, there was silence on the other end. Then, he spoke, his tone more serious than usual. "You don't have to say it, Mike. I always knew you appreciated it. We were brothers, you know? We had to push each other. That's why we were successful." "I'm glad we did," Michael said quietly. "I think that's what I've been realizing lately. All these years, I've been so focused on the games, on being the best. But it was the people around me, the guys like you, who made all the difference." After their conversation, Michael felt lighter. There was something about hearing Dennis speak so honestly, so simply. They hadn't always seen eye to eye, but in that moment, it was clear how much they had valued each other. Dennis had been an integral part of the championship teams, his presence changing the dynamics of the game, and yet, Michael had always been too focused on himself to fully acknowledge it. Now, he could see it. A few days later, Michael met up with his old coach, Phil Jackson, at a cafe in Chicago. The atmosphere was calm, far removed from the intense days of practice and strategy. They talked about basketball, of course, but also about life after the game. Phil had always been the kind of coach who valued balance, who saw the game as part of a bigger picture, and Michael found himself leaning into that philosophy more than ever before. "I've been thinking a lot about how we used to approach everything," Michael said, stirring his coffee slowly. "I was so driven, always pushing, always trying to prove something to the world. But I realize now that it was the relationships, my teammates, the people in my life, that really defined me. Not the wins, not the losses." Phil nodded. "That's the key, Mike. It's always been about the journey, not the destination. The game gives you a platform, but it's the people around you, the moments you share, that matter more than anything." The conversation stretched on into the late afternoon, and as they parted ways, Michael felt a profound sense of peace. He had spent years chasing a sense of purpose in basketball, but now, he was finding it in other places, places that had always been right in front of him. The following week, Michael visited his old high school again. He walked through the same hallways, the same locker rooms where he had once been cut from the varsity team. It was a place that had started his journey, and he had returned many times over the years, each visit evoking memories of both failure and triumph. But this time, it felt different. The significance of that rejection, of being told he wasn't good enough, no longer defined him. It had shaped him, yes, but he no longer saw it as the defining moment of his life. Now, he saw it as a lesson in resilience. Standing in the gym, Michael looked around and felt the weight of his past. He wasn't the same young player who had been cut from the team all those years ago. He had grown, and he had learned. He had learned to embrace failure, to understand that success was not about avoiding mistakes but about learning from them. The gym that had once represented rejection now felt like a symbol of growth and possibility. He had taken what he learned from that moment and turned it into something positive, something that had pushed him to be the greatest. His thoughts turned to his family as he stood there. The realization that they had always been the foundation of his success hit him harder than ever. He had pushed them away, driven by the need to prove something to the world, and yet, they had always been there. They had been his anchor when the pressure of fame became too much. Michael thought of his children, growing up in the shadow of his legacy. They had seen him at his best and at his worst, and through it all, they had loved him. That evening, he called them together for a family dinner. He wanted to be present, to show them that he understood now the importance of being there, of being more than just a father in name but a father in action. As they sat down around the table, the conversation was easy. They talked about school, about life, and about the things that truly mattered. There was no mention of basketball, no mention of his past accomplishments. Instead, Michael focused on listening to them, on engaging with them in a way he hadn't before. "You know, kids," Michael began, after a few minutes of quiet conversation, "I've spent a lot of time thinking about my past. About the games, the championships, the fame. But what I've realized is that none of that matters as much as being here with you. It's the moments we share, the time we spend together, that's the real victory. I've been so focused on winning, on proving something, but now I see what's important." The kids nodded, listening intently. Michael could see how much they had grown, how much they had learned, and he felt proud. They had all experienced life differently than he had, but he knew that in many ways, they were teaching him just as much as he had taught them. As the evening wound down, Michael reflected on the day. The time spent with his family, the conversations with old teammates, and the quiet moments of reflection had all led him to a new understanding of himself. He had spent so many years pushing for more, but now he understood that true success was not about the victories or the accolades. It was about the people who had been there for him, the lessons he had learned, and the relationships he had built along the way. That night, as he lay in bed, Michael closed his eyes with a sense of calm that had eluded him for so long. He had spent a lifetime chasing greatness, but now he knew that greatness wasn't just about the game. It was about how you lived, how you loved, and how you made the most of the time you had. And as he drifted off to sleep, Michael Jordan finally felt at peace with the legacy he had built, not on the court, but in the hearts of those who had shared in his journey. The days continued to unfold, and Michael Jordan found himself in an unfamiliar place, content. For years, the fire that had burned so intensely inside him had driven every decision, every move he made. He had lived for the thrill of competition, for the adrenaline that came with each game, each challenge. But now, with that same intensity subdued, Michael began to understand something he had never fully grasped before. There was peace in slowing down and living without the constant pressure to achieve more. The decision to step away from basketball had been hard, but in many ways, it had been the right one. He had spent a career striving for perfection, battling through injuries, and pushing himself to be better than anyone else. He had achieved everything he set out to do and more, but now, looking back, Michael saw that there was more to life than simply winning. The years of competition had shaped him, but the quiet moments, the ones with his family, with his old teammates, and even with Raymond, had taught him more about life than any championship ever could. It was during one of his more peaceful moments, sitting in the backyard with Juanita, that Michael found the clarity he had been searching for. They were talking about the kids, about how they had grown so much over the years, and about the things they had learned from their experiences. There was no rush, no overwhelming pressure. For the first time in a long time, Michael felt like he could just sit back and listen, absorb the present without worrying about what came next. "Mike," Juanita said softly, "I've always admired your drive. You were never satisfied with just being good. You always wanted more, and that's part of why you were great. But now, I see you differently. You're not just a basketball player anymore. You're the person who's learned what really matters. And I'm proud of you for that." Her words hit him in a way he hadn't expected. For so long, he had defined himself by his achievements on the court, by the things that people celebrated. But now, with a sense of calm settling over him, Michael realized that the true victory was not in the trophies or the titles, it was in the lessons he had learned, in the relationships he had nurtured, and in the impact he had made on the people around him. That night, as he lay in bed, Michael thought about the things that had always driven him. It wasn't just about basketball, it was about the pursuit of something greater. But now, he understood that greatness wasn't something to be chased, it was something to be embraced. It was about being present, about finding purpose in every moment, whether on the court or off it. As the days passed, Michael found himself reconnecting with his old teammates in a deeper way than ever before. His relationship with Scottie Pippen had always been a complicated one, filled with rivalry and competition, but there was a bond there too. They had shared victories, losses, and countless moments that defined their careers. In a quiet conversation one afternoon, Scottie spoke candidly about their time together, reflecting on what they had accomplished and how far they had come. "You know, Mike," Scottie said, sitting across from him in the living room, "we had something special. We didn't always see eye to eye, but we pushed each other to be better. That's what made us great." Michael nodded. "We did. And I didn't always appreciate it the way I should have. I was so focused on the bigger picture, on the idea of winning, that I missed out on the small moments, the ones that really mattered. The moments with you, with the team, with everyone who was there helping us achieve what we did." Scottie smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "It's easy to miss those moments when you're chasing something all the time. But you've learned. I can see that. We all have. We're still here, and we've got something real that's bigger than basketball." The conversation stuck with Michael long after Scottie left. He had spent years building a legacy, but now, he understood that the most important part of that legacy was the impact he had on the people who had been by his side, the ones who had shared in the journey with him. It wasn't the stats, the accolades, or the recognition that mattered, it was the bond he had built with others along the way. Later that week, Michael visited the old Bulls training facility. It had been years since he'd stepped foot inside, but the memories came rushing back as he walked through the halls. The echoes of practices, the sound of sneakers on the court, the camaraderie, those were the things that had made his career meaningful. It wasn't the championships, the MVPs, or the fame, it was the work he had put in alongside his teammates, the sweat, the grind, and the moments of growth. he wandered into the old locker room, where it all began. There was a quiet serenity to the place now, a stillness that reflected how much had changed. The players, the staff, and the coaches who had once been a part of that world were all scattered in different directions, but the memories remained. Michael could almost hear the laughter, the chatter before games, and the sound of clapping after a hard practice. It wasn't the trophies that stood out, it was the shared moments, the small things that had helped him become who he was. After a while, Michael walked out onto the court, standing in the center as the lights dimmed around him. He closed his eyes, letting the memories flood his mind. The sound of the crowd cheering, the intensity of the games, the high stakes, it all felt so real, so vivid. But now, it was all part of a bigger picture. The game had given him everything, but it had also taught him something far more important: how to live beyond the game. The arena was silent now, but for Michael, it still held a certain magic. It wasn't the same feeling he had once had, when the pressure of the game consumed him, when the crowd's cheers were the only thing that mattered. Now, he understood that the true magic of the game was in the moments that weren't celebrated, the quiet moments shared with those who mattered most. He took a deep breath, knowing that it was time to move on. The legacy he had built was part of his history, but it wasn't what defined him. What defined him now was his ability to be present, to embrace life beyond the court, and to appreciate the relationships that had shaped him. As Michael left the court, he felt a sense of fulfillment. His journey had been long, filled with both triumph and struggle, but now, standing in the quiet of the arena, he understood that the true victory was in how he had lived his life. It wasn't about the accolades. It was about the people he had touched, the lessons he had learned, and the moments he had shared along the way. As he walked away, Michael Jordan finally felt at peace. He had spent his entire career chasing greatness, but now, he understood that greatness wasn't something to be pursued. It was something that could only be found in the moments of connection, in the bonds forged with those who shared in the journey. And for Michael, that was the greatest victory of all. The final chapter of Michael Jordan's journey had taken him to places he never expected. The world had known him as the greatest basketball player ever, but as his career faded into the past, it was the quiet moments, the relationships, and the deep introspection that had defined the second half of his life. Now, as the years of reflection and reconnection settled into a new rhythm, Michael found peace in the very things that had once seemed like distractions: his family, his friends, and the simple joys of everyday life. Michael had spent so much of his life running towards greatness, his eyes fixed firmly on the next challenge, the next title, the next victory. But as time passed, he realized that the most important victories weren't the ones displayed in the trophy case. They were the victories of personal growth, of learning to connect with others, and of finding a way to live fully beyond the sport that had defined him for so long. The phone call that came late one night was unexpected. It was Raymond. The man who had quietly supported him from the shadows of the stadium had become a symbol of the uncelebrated moments in Michael's life, the moments that, though unnoticed by the public, were part of the foundation of his journey. "Mike, it's Raymond," his voice crackled through the phone. "I've been meaning to talk to you. I don't know if it's the right time, but I've been thinking about you a lot lately." Michael sat up, his heart beating a little faster. "Raymond, it's good to hear from you. What's on your mind?" Raymond's voice was calm, but there was a sense of weight in his words. "I wanted to say thank you. For everything. For coming back. For seeing what really matters. I think you've always known, deep down, what it takes to be great. But you've also learned something else, the most important thing of all. And for that, I'm grateful." Michael's throat tightened, and he took a moment before answering. "Raymond, you've been there for me in ways no one else has. You were always there, watching, supporting, even when I didn't see it. I don't know if I can ever truly express how much that means to me." Raymond chuckled softly. "You don't have to. I've seen what you've done, Mike. You've lived a life most of us can only dream of. But it's not the games, not the fame, that's not what makes you great. It's how you live, how you care, and how you've embraced what's truly important. That's what matters." The conversation lingered in Michael's mind long after they hung up. Raymond had always known how to cut through the surface and get to the heart of things. In that moment, Michael realized just how far he had come. His whole life had been defined by pushing boundaries, by proving people wrong, by reaching for something beyond what anyone thought possible. But now, the victory was not in the game itself, but in understanding what made it all worthwhile. And Raymond, in his quiet way, had helped Michael see that. The next day, Michael reached out to his children. They had grown up surrounded by the legacy of his career, but he now wanted them to see a different side of him. He wanted them to see the father, the man who had made mistakes, learned from them, and who now valued the simple things more than the big wins. "I've been thinking about our family," he said during a quiet dinner. "We've all been through a lot, and I've made a lot of mistakes along the way. But I want you to know that I'm here. I'm not just here in the physical sense, but I'm here for you. I've spent so many years chasing things that don't matter as much as the time we have together." His children listened intently, their eyes full of understanding. They had watched him from a distance, seen him in the spotlight, but now they were seeing a side of him that had been hidden for too long. Michael wasn't just a basketball legend. He was a father, a mentor, and someone who had learned to embrace life beyond the court. "I don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore," Michael continued. "What I want most now is to be present, to make the most of the time we have together. The victories that matter most are the ones we share." The conversation left Michael with a sense of contentment. He didn't need to be a perfect father or a perfect person. He just needed to be there. And that was enough. As the months went by, Michael continued to focus on what truly mattered. He spent more time with his family, more time mentoring young athletes, and more time giving back to the community. He worked with his foundation, helping to provide opportunities for kids who shared the same dreams he had once held. The same fire that had burned so brightly in him on the court was now directed at helping others realize their potential. But it wasn't just about charity or philanthropy, it was about teaching others the lessons he had learned through his own struggles. He wanted to show them that greatness wasn't just about talent or achievements. It was about resilience, about pushing through the hard times, and about valuing the people who helped you along the way. Michael found joy in watching the younger generation rise to the challenges of their own journeys. He saw pieces of himself in them, kids who were hungry, driven, and determined to make their mark. But he also wanted them to know that it wasn't just about being the best. It was about showing up every day, doing the work, and finding purpose in what they did, no matter the outcome. One afternoon, as he sat with a young basketball player in the gym, Michael shared one final piece of advice. "It's not about the titles, or the MVPs, or the rings," he said, leaning forward, his voice steady. "It's about how you live your life, how you treat the people around you, and how you face adversity. The game will come and go, but the people you connect with, the relationships you build, that's what defines you. That's where true greatness lies." The young player nodded, absorbing every word. Michael knew that he didn't need to prove anything anymore. He had done what he set out to do. His legacy was secure, not in the records he had broken, but in the lives he had touched and the lessons he had passed on. As Michael left the gym that day, he felt a sense of finality. The last chapter of his journey had been written, but it wasn't the one he had expected. It wasn't about the victories, the highlights, or the accolades. It was about the quiet moments, the ones spent with family, friends, and the people who had stood by him through it all. Those were the victories that would last. Walking into the sunset, Michael Jordan knew that he had finally found peace. He had spent his life chasing greatness, but now, he understood that true greatness was never about what you achieved, it was about how you lived, who you loved, and the impact you made along the way. And with that knowledge, he was content.